Look at me. What do you see? Who do you see? If you saw me on the street, would you speak to me? Would you stare? Or would you ignore me altogether? What about now? I'm 6'3" in these shoes. Does that make you intimidated or jealous? You see, in seconds, you have made judgments about who you think I am. And I've spent my life answering questions based on what people see. Questions about my race, my religion, my height, and even my athletic abilities. And I've spent too much of my life convinced that I'm the only one who struggled to find my identity in a world that insists on defining it for me. But I think that most of the Millennial Generation shares in this struggle. I believe that the Millennial Generation understands what it means to connect with multiple groups of people, but being still told who you can and can't be by the world. And I believe that it is time for us to challenge the way we look and understand identity. But let me back up and start at the beginning. I am the product of biracial marriage. My father was born and raised in Taipei, Taiwan. He moved to Vancouver, Canada when he was 14, where he learned English, graduated high school, and later went on to graduate from UC Davis. My mother, on the other hand, well, she's about as American as it gets. My mother is a direct descendant of some of the first colonial pilgrims to ever reach this continent. Her ancestors, and my ancestors for that matter, are some of the people who signed the Declaration of Independence. I think some people might look at my parents and wonder how two very different worlds ever came together. But in my world, it's the only thing I've ever known. And in many ways, this blending of cultures has profoundly impacted my identity. On my first day in kindergarten, I came home from school very distressed. Mom, I'm the only girl in my class with black hair and brown eyes, and the girls in my class, they only stare and whisper. My mom said that I was probably the only Chinese girl in my class, and that maybe that's why I look different than the other girls. Yeah, but Mom, does that matter? I mean, the girls won't talk to me or even play with me. My mom looked at me again and said that maybe the girls in my class had never met someone who was Chinese, so it was different for them. Okay, but Mom, you talk to our neighbors all the time. You're Chinese, but they're not. My mom said that she wasn't Chinese. My dad was Chinese, but she was an American. Apparently, this was the first time anyone had ever told me because I burst into tears and refused to believe her. At just 6 years old, I had already begun to shape my identity. My dad only spoke Chinese at home. We only ate Chinese food that my American mother cooked for us, and my parents only called me by my Chinese name. I never saw the difference in my parents' skin color, but my new classmates had seen the difference in mine. And for the first of what would be many, many times in my life, I was an outsider. I was not the person people saw me as. But I didn't have the vocabulary at 6 or even 13 to tell you that, though. No, I just struggled to define my identity all through my adolescence. For starters, I was this tall at 13 years old. Yes, in 8th grade, I stood at 5'11". This is a picture of me just before I started middle school. I don't know the average height of a middle schooler, but this was the average height discrepancy between me and all of my classmates until high school. Being 13 is hard enough, but at 6 feet tall, I struggled to walk down the hall without falling. But the worst part was having to constantly explain why I didn't play sports. People would ask me if I played a sport, and I would tell them no. And inevitably, the question that followed was, why? Why does it matter? Why do I have to explain to you why I don't live up to your expectations? And once again, I didn't fit the mold, and I was an outsider. I spent the rest of middle school and high school trying to find my place. I connected with so many groups of people, but only up to a certain point. I connected with the thespians in the theater program and the musicians in my choir and the Christians at my church and the Chinese students in my classes. But it was like I could never be fully present with one group because a piece of me had been left with another. It seemed everyone else had found their place, so why couldn't I? Why was I still an outsider? But the answer to that question is actually much bigger than me, because I'm not the only one asking why. Every day I meet more and more people like me, people, millennials, who understand this feeling of not sure who they are because they connect with so many people. I believe that millennials are the generation that is different. I have seen how millennials challenge traditional expectations and demand for change on issues like family, faith, gender, and sexuality. But most importantly, I have seen that I'm not an outsider at all. You see, I belong to a new generation. The millennials grew up not only in the age of technology, but with the age of technology. We are criticized for being narcissistic and lazy, but we are also praised for being progressive and optimistic. And we are both applauded and reprimanded for being so open to change. The truth is, no one seems to agree on who or what a millennial is. But that's my point. You see, the millennial generation does everything different than the previous generations, yet we still live in a world where those expectations are placed on us. And as a result, we feel like outsiders. I belong to and represent a generation that cannot be categorized by one faith, one family, one ethnicity, or sometimes even one gender. And I'm here to tell you that none of those things make me an outsider. Pew Research Institute found that 4 out of every 10 American millennials are considered non-white, compared to previous generations combined, where less than 3 out of every 10 are non-white. Now consider that 1/3 of America's population is considered a millennial. A 10% difference in ethnic diversity is actually a really big deal, considering the fact that it happened over one generation. American millennials represent some of the first children of the biracial marriages in this country, and the first American-born children to immigrant families. I am an example of both of those things. We live in a gray world that hangs somewhere between the history of our families and the reality of where we live now. We simultaneously belong to both worlds while also belonging to neither. Several months ago, National Geographic posted an article and gallery of the changing faces in America. These are real people. These are people who claim more than one country and even more than one continent as an integral part of their identity. Martin Scholler photographed these individuals and said that he wanted to challenge the way we use appearance to shape identity. These people on the screen and my fellow peers represent a generation faced with an identity crisis unlike anyone else, because identity is much bigger than the color of our skin or the place that we're from. We are a multifaceted generation that embraces being ethnically diverse, culturally diverse, socially diverse, and even politically diverse. And we welcome the ability to challenge traditional expectations. My experiences have led me to believe, though, that I'm not the only one whose existence hangs somewhere between two worlds. I have many friends who were born and raised half their lives in a foreign country, and after years of living in America, return home and find they actually don't belong in either place. I have other friends who are from halfway across the country, and after years of studying at school, no longer identify with their home state, nor with Texas. And even still, I have other friends whose sexual preferences have forced them to choose between their faith and the reality of who they are. The millennial generation is not so unlike every other generation, and that we connect to those we understand and relate to. But we are unlike other generations, and that we connect to people and understand people more than any other generation has. We connect to people both across town and across the world. But perhaps the issue is not that we don't fit into census categories and statistical data, but that these distinctions exist at all. What if these distinctions, these identities that have been constructed before us by previous generation, no longer fit the needs of this generation? Our generation can't be categorized so simply anymore. And I'm here to tell you today that doesn't make me an outsider. It doesn't make us outsiders. We are a new generation. We are dynamic and full of change with the power to change the world in ways you couldn't have even imagined at our age. I'm sure there are many of you sitting there thinking, okay, so what does this mean? What do we do about this generational gap? And the truth is, I don't have an answer for you. Because the very question you're asking misunderstands the needs and the diversity of this generation. Instead, we are asking for you to embrace us as we are. We are asking for you to come into the uncertainty and the ambiguity and welcome the uncertainty that lies ahead. I challenge you to recognize our many facets and stop putting us into boxes that we don't fit into. I ask you to praise us for our ambition and allow us to dream wild and crazy dreams. Pew Research Institute found that the millennials, just as much, if not more than any other generation, have experienced the struggle and the hardship in the past couple of decades. But more than any other generation, we look to the future with hope and with optimism. I don't have very many answers for you. But what I can tell you is that the world is growing beyond our ability to categorize and organize. And I'm here today to say that millennials should not be made feel like outsiders because we don't fit traditional expectations, but that millennials should be embraced as a generation that is learning to live and thrive in a constantly evolving world. And so, while you may not be able to label me or define me, I stand here again and ask you this. Who do you think I am? Or maybe, more importantly, who do you think I can be? Thank you.